when the Hungarian-American filmmaker George Pal decided to make what he considered to be the first serious attempt at a science fiction film, he chose as his subject a manned mission to the moon. And the film accurately predicted so much of what the future held, it's frankly astounding in hindsight. Another technical advisor on staff was artist Chesley Bonestell. Bonestell had worked for years as a matte painter in Hollywood, doing work on such films as Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons. Despite the film's special effects looking pretty laughable today, they were astonishing at the time, so much so that the film won an Academy Award for them. Destination Moon premiered on June 27, 1950. The film made somewhere around $5 million that year, which is nearly 10 times its budget. Its success was assuredly astronomical, and George Pal would parlay that success into a notable career as one of Hollywood's premier science fiction film producers.
A U.S. scientist, Dr. Hendren, has just confirmed the existence of the greatest threat mankind has ever faced. A rogue star named Belus is on a collision course with the Earth. In just 8 months, our home will be swallowed up in the fires of an alien sun, and our only hope is to escape to the planet that orbits Belus, a planet called Zero. But the world laughs at Dr. Hendren, dismissing his findings as the paranoid ravings of a lunatic, so he is forced to find anyone who can help him build a rocket-powered ark to another world before time runs out.
Before we really get started, if you could hit that like button, I might just give you a spot on my ark when it all starts falling apart. If you want to see even more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe as well. I'm getting closer and closer to that magical 1,000 subscribers mark, and every new subscriber helps. Thank you in advance. With that out of the way, let's get back to the subject at hand. In the early 1930s, the legendary filmmaker Cecil B. DeMille was interested in making a film based on the recently published apocalyptic science fiction novel by Philip Wiley and Edwin Ballmer called When Worlds Collide. DeMille envisioned his adaptation, simply titled The End of the World, as a big-budget epic spectacle to surpass everything he'd done before. Paramount bought the movie rights with the intention of giving DeMille the green light, but they shelved the project after the release of RKO's disaster film Deluge, which was seen as a bit too similar to When Worlds Collide. In 1950, the producer George Pal, who was working on Destination Moon, went to Paramount looking for his next project. Paramount, who had already turned Pal down when it came to distributing Destination Moon, was unconvinced that science fiction was a viable movie genre, and so they let him have the rights to When Worlds Collide at a substantially reduced cost. When Destination Moon turned out to be an enormous hit, though, Paramount went back to Pal and offered to buy the rights back. Pal agreed as long as he remained attached to the project as its lead producer, and apparently, he made a hefty profit based on the buyback alone. Pal had originally commissioned a screenplay from playwright, screenwriter, and occasional film reviewer Jack Moffat, who produced a script that was fairly faithful to the original novel. However, after Paramount came on board, Moffat's script was deemed too expensive, and so the studio commissioned another screenplay from the relatively new Sidney Boehm, who changed a lot of the details to, among other things, better suit a less ambitious budget. Early casting considerations had to be scaled back as well, so for the lead, they had to abandon plans to ask Douglas Fairbanks, who was Pal's first choice. Instead, they gave the lead role of David Randall to the minor character actor Richard Dare, who had never had a lead role in a movie despite having many on stage. Opposite him as the female lead was the completely unknown Barbara Rush, a couple of years before she'd earn a Golden Globe for her work in It Came from Outer Space. Another newcomer to Hollywood was Peter Hansen, who plays Dr. Drake. He'd recently made his film debut in Rudolph Mattei's Branded, and he'd go on to have a long career as a character actor in film and television, culminating in a several decades-long run on General Hospital. Also worth noting is John Hoyt, who would later play the Doctor in the Star Trek pilot.
A man either lives life as it happens to him, meets it head-on and licks it, or he turns his back on it and starts to wither away.
And this minor character, who was played by an uncredited Kirk Allen, best known for being the first live-action Superman a few years earlier. The famed European cinematographer Rudolf Mattei, who had recently started directing film noirs like DOA and westerns like Branded, was given the director's chair, and the film was rushed into production in order to take full advantage of the enormous success of Destination Moon. The sci-fi artist Chesley Bonestell was retained by PAL after his work on Destination Moon and was responsible for conceiving most of the visual effects and matte paintings. To execute Bonestell's vision, PAL hired the award-winning effects pioneer Gordon Jennings, who'd done the effects for Island of Lost Souls, Spawn of the North, and Dr. Cyclops, among many others. It was Bonestell's idea to show the rocket taking off from a ramp, and it was Jennings who put together sequences like the flooding of Times Square. For other sequences, they had to rely on stock footage. Unfortunately, the rushed production, combined with a relatively modest budget of under $1 million, forced the filmmakers to make several compromises, especially concerning the movie's final act. PAL lobbied hard to get an extra $5,000 to film a miniature version of the rocket and alien planet of Zero for the final shots, but Paramount wouldn't budge. He was then forced to settle on using a rough Bonestell sketch for the alien landscape, which he'd originally inserted into the film as a placeholder for previews, intending for it to be replaced. The movie released wide in August of 1951 and was a modest success, the third highest grossing science fiction film of the year. Its exact box office numbers are hard to come by, but it did make $1.6 million in theater rentals, which probably equates to a few times that in gross revenue, somewhere in the $4 to $5 million range. Critics seemed to enjoy it too, particularly praising the cinematography and special effects, which got an Academy Award nomination and win, respectively. George Pal wanted to make a sequel, to be based on the novel's sequel, After Worlds Collide, but after his 1955 film Conquest of Space underperformed at the box office, plans for the follow-up were abandoned by Paramount. When Worlds Collide is the third sci-fi film from 1951 that is usually credited with launching the golden age of science fiction cinema, after The Day the Earth Stood Still and The Thing from Another World. I've already covered the other two, and I have to admit, this is my least favorite of the three. I don't hate it by any stretch, but it doesn't hold up as well as its contemporaries. In terms of PAL's filmography, it's not as realistic or prescient as PAL's Destination Moon, nor as exciting as PAL's War of the Worlds, which came 2 years later. That said, it's impossible to understate the movie's importance as a seminal disaster film that helped set the stage for the 50s sci-fi boom that followed. It is the prime template for a whole subgenre of science fiction, in which scientists warn of looming disaster, politicians ignore them until it is too late, passions flare, heroes make grand sacrifices, and everything steps aside to let the spectacle take center stage at the climax. It's a disturbing movie in the sense that the world really does come to an end, and in its day, it served as a potent parable for audiences contemplating the very real threat of nuclear devastation just around the corner. After the 60s and 70s saw an explosion of smaller-scale disaster movies, the epic disaster movie came back in a big way in the mid-90s. Steven Spielberg was set to direct a remake of When Worlds Collide for DreamWorks, but when Touchstone Pictures and Jerry Bruckheimer announced that they were working on Armageddon, a movie about an asteroid on a collision course with the Earth, the script for the When Worlds Collide remake was melded with a separate script based on the Arthur C. Clarke novel The Hammer of God, which was also about an asteroid headed to the Earth. When the project was fast-tracked, Spielberg could no longer direct, so the new project, eventually called Deep Impact, was given to Mimi Leder, and underwent so many changes that the final film bears almost no resemblance to either The Hammer of God or When Worlds Collide. Large-scale, apocalyptic, sci-fi-tinged disaster movies still occasionally pop up, with Roland Emmerich's many examples borrowing quite heavily from George Pal's pioneering work, but they're rarely as successful as 1951's When Worlds Collide. I wouldn't mind a remake that updates the science and technology but sticks a little closer to the source material, but it doesn't seem all that necessary. When Worlds Collide is a product of its time, a movie that wowed audiences in its day but has been mimicked and improved upon so many times in the years since that it struggles to live up to its reputation. Don't get me wrong, it is an essential science fiction film from the 50s that did wonders for the genre and for the career of George Pal. Every fan of classic sci-fi cinema would do well to have a copy of When Worlds Collide in his or her collection. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. What do you think? Could a modern remake of When Worlds Collide work, or are you opposed to remakes on general principle? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you really do like these videos, consider joining my Patreon to get bonus videos, vote on future topics, and more. You can also check out my website at emcgill.com, where you'll find written reviews of plenty of sci-fi classics in both film and literature. Until next time, though, when we'll see what happens when a serial killer gets hold of a time machine, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, as long as you're not hurting anybody.
Theory, it should work.
Always theories. Jigsaw puzzles on paper. Aren't you fellows ever positive?
Only about doomsday.